having to stretch our memory back to Series 11, Programme 8, Goldcliff.
What year was that, Tim?
Oh, bloody hell, now you're... wait a minute. Yeah, you better tell me, what date was it?
Quite a long time ago, 12 years.
12 years, right, so we'll do our best. Now, the thing I remember was the mud and those huge blocks of stuff we decided to cut out and carry back. They weighed an absolute ton. I hasten to add, I wasn't carrying any of them, but people like Kerry and all the guys who were carrying stuff, it was a hell of a weight. But there was a point when, I almost thought, here we are stuck in the mud, and what on earth are you going to have to do if we're by the side of the estuary there in the middle of the mud? But sort of in the middle, you began to sort of work out a little bit about it that came from your point of view. Can you remember some of the things you came up with?
Indeed, I can't, like your memory to some extent. I remember the mud. Well, I remember the mud getting on the seats of the cars, and then in the hotel, and on the and on the bed sheets, and they must have dreaded us coming back in the evening. So I've got loads of photographs that I took there, and everybody is covered in mud. They look like underground miners. But it was an interesting sight from a landscape archaeology perspective, because you're quite right, you get to somewhere like that and the site's sort of out in the mud somewhere, what can you actually do? But as with almost any archaeological site, it's not just what is there, it's what was it like when people were actually living there, i.e. in the Mesolithic period, because landscape has changed so much, and even sea levels have changed since that period. So it's one of those opportunities to see how much information does survive, which tells you something about the environment that those Mesolithic hunter-gatherers were experiencing when they were leaving their footprint. It was an opportunity to look very carefully at the few clues there were. And I remember one particular moment when I was looking at the Ordnance Survey map, 19th century map. It was crazy. What's the 19th century map going to tell you about the Mesolithic period? But what was very interesting was the way the heights that were on that map along the road down to the foreshore where we were working, it actually rose as you went to the foreshore, and it was like that in quite a few areas. And that immediately started to raise the possibility that the ground had been higher before erosion took place around there. And even the streams and the drains there were flowing in away from the sea. So it started to suggest that in the Mesolithic period, there'd been much higher ground there. And of course, what that does, then you have to take that further and further afield and get well away from the site. And we were sitting between two major rivers, the River Usk and the River Wye. And one of the things that we do know about the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers is that they would use rivers for navigation into the uplands, into the interior territories. They're almost like corridors of movement between the coast and the inland areas. They're able to follow the animals, follow the plants that are growing, get berries, and so on. And it all started to come together that we were sort of sitting. The site was actually in the Mesolithic period on a little island between two rivers. It's almost like an ideal gathering spot for hunter-gatherers.
It reminded me, Stewart, a bit of some of those sites we used to do in Somerset that would be relatively flat to the eye, but it made those areas of highland all the more important. It seems like our long-lost ancestors had a very good eye for the kind of area that presumably gave them a vantage point out of the water with access to all the fishing and hunting around, but also presumably gave them a natural defence.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, although quite how we should think of conflict in that period is probably different to how we think of it now, because these were small families moving around the territories, as it were, following their stomachs more than anything else. But what you've raised there is quite interesting, because one of the things I think that these hunter-gatherers were doing was actually herding animals, and if you can herd them into areas of just slightly higher ground that are surrounded by water, then you've got a natural, almost like a natural corral, haven't you? They're not going to get off their higher ground when the water's around it, and so you can herd them, and then you can slaughter them as and when needed. I think it's an area of animal management that we tend to forget, that you can actually use the topography in the landscape to corral animals with.
And that reminds me, Stewart, one of my favourite Victor's pictures was of this site. And I remember seeing those, I think he'd portrayed aurochs, which are
That's
a kind
right.
of ancient, larger boned version of cattle. And I remember he caught a moment when somebody was spearing an auroch. Do you remember Victor's picture?
I remember it was great. I mean, there aren't many Victor's drawings I don't remember, because they are just so, they bring everything to life. But that one in particular is actually one of my favourites. It just brought as you say, it brings a moment to life, and it was so graphic in that struggle which you have in the Mesolithic period, that struggle for survival. You have to kill that animal if you want to survive, and they're using very primitive tools, very primitive weapons, and it's at that time, we're what, 5,000-6,000 BC. It's at the time before people are building monuments. We don't get monuments until about 1,000 years later, when we get these things called causeway camps, they used to be called, where people came together, and it was often there they were on slightly elevated bits of ground. So it captured not only a moment in time when an auroch was being slaughtered, it was capturing a moment in time almost before people started settling down in the landscape as well. It was an absolutely wonderful picture they drew there.
Did you get a chance to see those footprints that had been discovered?
Oh, indeed, yes, indeed, yeah. I helped on the foreshore take some casts for some. I did see the sort of excavation in the tent, as it were, as well. So, yes, they're quite evocative, aren't they?
And I think that moment, it was a nice moment when Tony took Bridget, I think it was, who's now in New Zealand, and sort of retraced the steps across that mud. And it was an amazing moment, caught, those footsteps kind of caught in time.